Hi, everybody. Welcome to the War Room, our interview series as part of the Clone Star podcast. I am your host, Joe Hurley, and joining me this week, as usual, is my co host, Mike Overton. Mike, how are you?
I am good, thank you.
And this week, we're absolutely delighted to be joined by a composer with over 250 episodes of Star Trek under his composition belt, one movie. If I'm correct, 9 Emmy nominations and one win. He'll correct me if I'm wrong on any of that.
Two wins.
Two wins. There you go. I'm totally wrong already. So we're absolutely delighted to be joined by composer extraordinaire, magnificent legend of the Star Trek world, Dennis McCarthy. Dennis, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Seo and Mike, and it's great seeing you guys and meeting you, even though it's virtual. But it's so funny because on IMDb they say that one Emmy.
Yeah, that's where I got the list from. Yeah, so what's the second one? One is the DS9 title, yeah.
The theme, and then I can't remember which episode it was. It's a Next Generation, and I believe it's the one where Stark's father.
Unification.
Spock's father. Stark is my doctor. Spock. You get to be my age, you know. Spock's father comes on the show, and it was one of those things where I had 60 musicians, 6 French horns. I mean, just you name it. Strings to the wall, woodwinds, brass, everybody, percussion. And by this time, they had relented and let me use percussion, which was nice. You know, as Jay probably told you at the very beginning, it was like, okay, I think I heard a timpani.
So we've got 2 wins then. I'm going to have to correct IMDb on that. So that means 92 and 93 you won an Emmy then, is that right?
Yeah.
Wow. Oh, my word. Dennis, thanks again for coming on the show. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at your early life and things like that. Obviously, we know you eventually settle into the magnificent world of Star Trek, but growing up, did you grow up in a household filled with music, or how did it all come about?
Definitely full of music. We always had a piano, and my parents had an upright, and I started playing it when I was 4. And so my dad's mom had a baby grand, like a 5-footer. And she said, I'll trade you because you got something who's actually going to play it. So we got the baby grand, started to play, started taking piano lessons up until I was about 12. And then I wanted to learn about jazz. I heard Bessie Smith, you know, and I said, wait a minute, what is that? You know, that's wonderful. So I found a teacher, but my parents would not pay for it. They wanted me to do, et cetera, et cetera. You know, and I wanted to do, that I was more into that kind of a groove.
So hang on a second, Dennis. That means then, just tying it back to the Emmys here, you won an Emmy for Unification, and in the second part of that, there is a person playing jazz kind of piano in it. Is that your composition then in that episode?
I believe it was. Don't quote me on that. I'm not 100% sure. And it was either Mike Lang or Jim Cox or Tom Rainier, one of the 3 playing. Brilliant players. And so anyway, what I did is I went out and started mowing lawns in the neighborhood to make enough money to pay for my piano lessons. But I'm allergic to grass. But yeah, that's kind of stuff. So anyhow, I go out and I'd mow the neighbor's lawn for 50 cents. And I come to collect, of course, I have tears streaming down my face and my nose, and the whole thing. I said, 50 cents, please. And they give me $1. So it was a whole scam, but it worked. So I was able to pay for the piano teacher, and she taught me. First thing she showed me was a G13 chord. I was in, my God, I could be Ray Charles, And so anyway, I studied with her for a couple of years, and great fun. And my dad, I should back up, you asked about the family. My dad had a beautiful Irish tenor voice, truly Irish. I mean, he would sing, like opera, local opera companies and stuff. Like he would sing lead. Nessun Dorma was one of his, beautiful.
Oh, lovely.
And my mom was a pianist, but she didn't really read music. She was a totally ear player.
Wow.
And so that's what and when I was taking my classical quote unquote lessons, I'd get the ruler because the teacher would play something and purposely put a different note in. And I sit down, look at the music, and play the different note because I was hearing what she played. And to me, that was the way I learned.
Yeah.
And so, don't do that. Look at the music. So of course I looked at the music. Anyway. So I took piano lessons till I was maybe 14, 15 years old. And ended up being a church choir director because my dad was a church choir director. My mom was the kids choir director. And then when they moved up to San Francisco, I took over the job at I think I was 18 or something, 19 years old. And, good sized church, 500 people. And I always had a great love for the classics, great classical music, but I also had an even larger love for the Ray Charles of the world, the Bessies, everybody. And, my parents also were my dad used to sing jazz, so like a lot of big band stuff happened in the house. And so that was kind of my education. I graduated from high school, how I don't know, and ended up going to UCLA and majored in engineering, real good call there. So I basically would show up. Well, the problem was UCLA, when I'd come from the Valley, anybody who knows the San Fernando Valley knows it, you'd go over, it's the 405 now, it used to be Sepulveda. If you turn left, you go to UCLA. If you turn right, you go to the beach. Okay, come on.
If you have a choice, which one would you go to? UCLA or the beach?
Let me think. Do I have suntan lotion? Yes. Okay. So, a year and a half later, UCLA said, nice, goodbye. So I went to Valley JC at junior college because I got kicked out. I never showed up to class. The JC I actually loved, and I actually took one semester of music with Patty, who still is my wife 58 years later. And we took a music class together, and the music teacher said, you know what, it's, I'm sorry, I skipped over, but then I did fine. Went to San Fernando Valley State, and I went there, that's where Patty and I were going. And he called the both of us into the room. We were both taking music, because what would happen is he would, I've always had an ear. I mean, that's what I did. It kind of came that way. And it's the same as I can't walk and chew gum at the same time, but I can, hear music. And so we took this class, and he said, okay, it's a basic music class. And he would play like a string quartet and say, okay, go up to the board, and they had all the staves, and he said, write what you've heard. Well, most of the students would write maybe the first 5 notes of the first violin. Well, I wrote the whole thing out. And he said, oh, you know the piece? I said, no,
just listen to it.
Played, isn't it? So he said, okay. So he called us into his room, and he said, one of you, and he pointed to Patty, should stay in school and really learn music. And the other one of you two should just get the hell out of here and recognize the other students. Go out and work. He said, we can't teach you anything you don't already know. And so basically I did. So I went to school for a total of 5 years. I didn't even get an AA degree. I mean, nothing. And I only took that one music class. That was it.
So hang on, Dennis, one thing, you said your wife is into music as well, and you're in the same school and things like that. Do you have a different kind of type of interest in music, or are you very much kind of aligned in it?
Well, at the time that we met, she was with a folk singing group and a duo. She was both. And she played guitar, and was teaching folk guitar in North Hollywood, California. And so it was natural that we got together, and I, of course, was doing whatever I did. I was starting to work with rock and roll bands. And I ran into a guy named Gary Usher, who was very famous. He was the car and surf era, the Beach Boys and stuff like that. Roger Christian, and he used to write a lot of tunes. And so I was with these groups, and they'd try to get me to sing in a chorus. I can't sing, it's horrible. And I mean, you think some of my dads would come into me, it didn't work. And so anyhow, the groups went Superstocks, the Four Speeds, I mean, all these car group names. And we were like cover bands for Beach Boys stuff a lot, not the Beatles. They hadn't come around yet. And, well, yeah, they did. That's another story. But anyway, so all of a sudden they had a hit called Go Little Honda, or Little Honda, the Hondells. And so I was not in that group, but their guy, the keyboard player, this was when Vietnam was starting up, got drafted. And so they had to replace him, and a fellow named Dick Burns and Les Weiser, who I went to high school with, a great saxophone player, said, well, Dennis, Dennis, because the job was, he had a Farfisa organ. He played bass with the left hand, organ with the right, stood on one foot so I could work the volume pedal, and sang third part harmony. I said, okay, works for me. So I went out with this band. And there were a couple of good singers in the group, but basically when we would do stuff, now and then Glenn Campbell would come and sing for us under cover of darkness, because he was signed to Capitol, of course, so he was not allowed to do anything else.
Yeah.
And of course he did. And so I met Glenn, and then I started doing some recording sessions. And I said, okay, these are car and surf. He didn't know, you need to read chords, really. You didn't need to read notes. And I did fine, and Glenn got to know me. I got to know him. Cut to the chase. Glenn calls up one day. I'm working at Patty's dad's liquor store in Burbank. And, slinging bottles and, trying to not get robbed. And so Glenn calls up and he says, Dennis. And I go, well, I won't do that anymore. Okay. He did have kind of a high voice. So he says, I just put out a record called Gentle on My Mind, and I got one by the time I get to Phoenix. And it looks like they're getting a little airplay. What are you doing? And I said, well, goofing around, working in a liquor store, I even worked at the assembly line at the Chevy plant in Van Nuys for a while. I mean, I kind of did the whole thing. And he said, well, I'll pay you, and this is a true story, $28.50 a night to come out with me on the road. And I said, do I have to pay for my hotel? Well, you split it with 3 other guys. You all get the same room. This was not a high rent operation. So we go out, and, Glenn's all of a sudden huge. I mean, he outsold the Beatles. He outsold Michael Jackson one year. Just monstrous. Galveston, Phoenix, Wichita linemen. So we're playing these huge venues, like outdoor stuff where there's 80,000 people, filling auditoriums, doing all this stuff. And the unions were getting kind of angry. They said, we need to have arrangements, charts for the musicians. And so Glenn said, well, I have my recording charts. Al Delory had done some really nice, obviously very nice charts for him. And he said, yeah, but we have other songs. And so he gets the band together. It's me, the keyboard guy, piano, occasionally a Wurlitzer, and Larry McNeely, the banjo player, not banjo, Bob the drummer, Bill the bass player. And he says, okay, do any of you guys know how to write orchestra arrangements? Band arrangements. Well, no. And he said, okay, any of you guys know how to read music? I said, well, I can read a little bit. He said, good, you're the arranger. And that is a true story. I went out and bought a book, Van Alexander, How to Arrange. And what I would do is I'd write arrangements. And I'd throw them on the stands. I'd conduct the show, play the piano. It was kind of a one-man band sort of a thing. And then after the show, I'd go up to the trumpet section. I'd say, okay, guys, how was my arrangement on, say, Yesterday, the Beatles tune, or whatever Glenn was singing? And they'd say, oh, it's great. I said, cut the crap. How was my arrangement? Oh, it sucked. All right. Why? Okay, boom, 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 boom. You don't write phrasing for us. You don't write long, short. We've owned these instruments. We know how to play them. Just write jazz phrasing or legit on top, and then we know what to do. Leave us alone. And stop putting the tenor sax above the alto sax. Okay. So I go back to the hotel room, have a touch of whatever, scotch or, before tequila. And I'd write a new chart, or at least their parts, and throw them on the stands the next night. Because, you play these three weeks at a time. You play these venues, especially in Vegas and Tahoe. And they say it's better, but still, up, next night a new chart. And so the next week I tackle the strings, same story. So that's how I learned to arrange, is ask the man that owns the instrument. That's always my philosophy, because no matter how much you think you don't know near as much as that guy's been playing trumpet for 30 years.
And Dennis, question for you then. So it just seems to be kind of almost like seismic kind of change. Like, as you said, you were literally working in a liquor store to suddenly being like on stage in front of like massive audiences. You were kind of writing the kind of arrangements and things like that. Did you just completely take it in your stride, or at any point did you say, what the hell am I doing here? Like, this is not where I thought I'd find myself?
Yeah, actually, to be honest, it was just another job for me at the time. It's like, except it was a lot more fun. It was great to go out to great restaurants and stuff. When Glenn started to go, it was first class all the way, traveling, hotels, and it just got better and better and better as time went on. It started off pretty rough, working Dante's in North Hollywood, and I'm trying to play left-hand bass, and the bass player saying, do it again, I'll kill you. I learned a lot of lessons from musicians. That's what but, no, for me, I mean, I had so many weird jobs in my life. You know, I worked for a full year swing shift at the Chevy plant, putting transmissions on 1965 Impalas. And, you know, I mean, holding up these things, you know, I went from 212 pounds down to 170 in a year. And I went from being kind of, you know, to buff. Because you're lifting 60, 80-pound transmissions all night. Yeah. So, you know, I could basically, well, anyway, I had a lot of fun. Let's put it that way.
So at this point now, you're working with Glenn Campbell. Are you saying to yourself at this point, this is what I'm going to do? I'm going to stay working with Glenn Campbell or artists like this. At any point, have you ever said to yourself, I'm going to try and get into movies, I'm going to try and get into TV? Or at this point, are you just there, I'm really happy with what I'm doing, I'm going to keep on doing this?
I loved what I was doing. It was really fun. Patty would come with me when we go to England or when we go to Vegas or Tahoe, and you know, so we had a great time. And as far as doing TV and stuff like that, it never occurred to me. But Glenn, remember, had the Glenn Campbell Good Time Hour for 4 years.
Yeah.
And so, well, here's a quick story. Well, probably not. I'm not very good at quick. So Glenn's paying us every week. I mean, to the point where his wife said, "You're paying him for this week? Well, then have him come over and string our Christmas lights." And he said, "Well, Dennis is afraid of heights." He said, "Good. 2-story house, stringing the Christmas lights." Anyway, so we're getting paid every week. And so Glenn says, "Well, everybody in the band has to work on the show." Well, for the drummer, bass player, banjo player, I'll straighten that out. Banjo player, you know, Larry McNeely, gifted. Him and Carl Jackson, two of the most amazing banjo players I've ever met. Anyway, he says, well, you have to use everybody. So they were able to work in the pit as their little bluegrass section of the show. But I'm a keyboard player. You know, you ain't got keyboards in bluegrass. So, okay, we're not going to do that. And so they said, well, why don't you be the pit piano player? And I went, okay, but you know, I don't read that well. Tough, you're doing it. Go over and meet Marty Page. So Marty Page was the music director. So I go to his house, and he's thrilled to see me. You know, I said, "Hey, Marty, look, I'm being forced to show up at your house. I'm sorry, I'm here. Can I just leave?" He said, "No, come on in." They said I had to talk to you. So I go in, and we go into his studio, and he's got one of these. He's got a Steinway B in his studio. I said, "Wow." So started to play, and he said, "Okay, play something." So I said, "Okay, I'll play Love for Sale." I did, you know, the sort of that. Anyway, I did that, and then he said, "Okay, play some blues," you know. So I played some blues. All right. And so then he says, okay, he throws a Peter Matz chart in front of me. Peter Matz was the music director for Carol Burnett. And the way he would write charts is he'd take score paper, pin it to the wall, fill a 12 gauge with ink, and blow it at the score paper. I mean, there were a million notes. And I looked at him and I said, "Marty, I already told you." And I had told him, I said, "I really am not a reader." And he said, "Okay, well," he started calling out songs, you know, "Okay, play this, play that, play this, play that." And so I played for about, I don't know, half an hour. You know, just he'd call out. Finally he says, "Play the Christmas song," you know, the old... And so I played that, and he says, "Well, that's pretty chicken shit." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "You played it in the key of C." He said, "I can go down to Hollywood and Vine and find 8 guys standing on the corner that can play the Christmas song in the key of C." He said, "Play it in F sharp." Well, I've been working with country bands, you know, Millsaps and Willie and all those guys because of Glenn's show. You know, I've worked with all of them. And I said, "Okay, it's just numbers, 1, 4, 2 minus, you know, okay, fine." So I played in F sharp. And he said, "Okay, play it in B natural." I said, "I am natural." He said, "No, play it in B natural." So I played it in B. And he said, fine. He says, "Okay." He said, have you noticed anything really odd about your playing?" And I'm going, "Okay, I'll bite." You know, he says, "I've asked you to play all these songs, and half the time you don't play the melody to the song. I'm not playing the lead line." And I said, "Well, I assumed you knew that part." And he went, "Oh," he said, "My boy, you're an arranger." He said, "You're a natural born arranger." He said, you don't care about the melody. You only care about the brass and the rhythm section and the strings. And I said, right. I couldn't. I said, if you asked me to give you the lyrics of Gentle on My Mind from Glenn, I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
It's knowing that you're in there if I lose it after that, because I don't pay any attention. I just use the melody as a way to, how do I augment this? How do I make it, sing? So he said, come, we'll arrange together. So it was great. He got Mike Lang on the piano, thank God. Mike was fabulous. Just what a great player. And he started me doing arrangements. So I wrote a chart. He said, the first chart is for Once in My Life, the Stevie Wonder thing, but for Ray Charles, who was on the show, my idol. So I said, okay, so I wrote this chart, worked on it hard, and Marty said, I want to see it first before I give it to the copyist. So I handed it to him, and he said, well, that's a great sketch. I said, what do you mean sketch? He said, you didn't transpose the instruments. He said, if you write a C for a B-flat trumpet, he's going to play a B-flat. If you write a C for a French horn, he's going to play an F. He said, and the viola player does not want to see anything in treble or bass clef. There is a viola clef, And I said, oh, so he fixed it up. And he said, but the worst thing you did, I said, oh God, I was waiting for it, is you wrote it in 4/4 time for Once in My Life, 2 bars, 3 bars, 4 bars. There's a reason for this, $80. He says, no, you write it in 2. 1, my 2, 3, 4, $80. So you double what you earned. I write it 2. I actually wrote a piece in 1. It was Beethoven's, that rock version of Beethoven. Says Nelson Riddle was doing a show and had me come and do the arrangement on it. And I wrote the first part in 1. $80. He said,
Dennis said,
he said, I'm going to try to do that myself.
when you were getting all this feedback, Dennis, did you ever feel that you were being overwhelmed by it? Were you thinking to yourself, this is too much, like I just want to do something normal, straightforward? You've given me so much information, I don't know if I can adapt to this. Or were you there going, I can do this, there's no worry at all?
Door number 2. Because the process with Glenn was over 9 years. So it was, everything I learned was, okay, I've learned this. Oh, here's something new. Oh, okay, I've learned that. Okay, here's something new. Glenn's doing a special with John Wayne and Burl Ives. And, I ended up writing a lot of the charts. And, by the time I got to that point, I was getting pretty good at writing charts. After I wrote 900 and some arrangements for Glenn over the years, everything from classical to, funk to rock and country, of course. And, like I say, I learned from the musicians. They were fantastic. I mean, what a way to learn, And like I said, I never went to college for music except for the one semester where he basically kicked me out of the class. And so I just kind of grew with it as it went. And I'm still working,
At this point, Dennis, how did it transition into TV, like in movies? Where did all that come from then?
Well, I did the specials, the music specials, which are always, it's just like a road show. You're doing arrangements for singers. And maybe a little play on music, play off, if there's a dance number, you're doing a dance number. So I left Glenn, I didn't work for a year and a half. It just got to the point with Glenn where we had kids and stuff. We had our 3 kids, and we wanted to, I wanted to be home. Yeah. So I thought, well, I'll stay home. So I said, I'll get a lot of work. Wrong. And one of the things that happened is that I went to a couple of recording sessions. Now I had seen Mike Lang at work in the pit and so forth, and so I went to a couple of recording sessions, and I said, I want to be a keyboard player on recording sessions. Then I heard Mike, Jim Cox, Tom Rainier play, and I went, oh, I better do something else. Literally, I couldn't believe their sight reading, their improvisational skills. These guys were magnificent. That's anyhow. So I thought, okay, so I got a call to do this Monte Carlo show. It went for 1 season. It was in Monaco, and it was the toughest show anybody has ever envisioned. First of all, there was no union protection. The cameraman, 21 or 22 people went to the hospital off that show, including our copyist, but that's another story. So anyway, I'll tell it. So anyway, I'll tell it right now. So I lose our copyist. And I'm writing all the arrangements. Well, I have a dance number 4 days a week, 4 shows a week for 10 weeks. And dance numbers, so I'm having to write these dance charts, and I'm writing charts for everybody. We just told the people that come, it's like Cher and everybody who was a star came and did this show, including Glenn. So it was good to see him. Doc Severinsen showed up without his charts, and I said, "You're with the rhythm section, dude. I'm writing the dance number right now. Sorry." So anyway, they had the Grand Prix, the Monte Carlo Grand Prix was one of those weeks. So the show was gone, and we had to leave the hotel. So I left the hotel and came back home. I wasn't going to tell you my stealing our copyist out of the hospital, but just trust me. With my jive French and 2 big cameramen, we actually got him out of his hospital bed, lost his shoes, and took him back to work. So that's the kind of show it was. So I come back to town, and I get a call from Dick Harris, music. He was the music director, and he said, I believe it was Warner's. Just going back to when I had all my hair, So anyway, he says, I've got a show. It's a spinoff of Dukes of Hazzard called Enos, E-N-O-S. And I want you to do it because you got country chops, but you can write for brass. I want brass and, steel guitar, the whole Megillah, the banjo and everything else. And so I said, okay. And I did this show. And I said, when does it go? He says, well, you only have a week to write it. I said, a week? Not a day and a half? I said, So anyway, so I did that show, and to cut to the chase, I finally get through that show, and I'm doing some other stuff, and here comes a Barbara Mandrell series, and Barbara and the 2 sisters, and I said, okay, so I went into, audition for the job, and the producer, Ernie Chambers, said, well, what have you done? And I named off some of the Dwight Smith, Dwight Hemian shows I'd done with Glenn, the John Wayne. He said, anybody can do that. So those guys give you 3 weeks to write a show. He says, I'm talking about the night before, getting down. Have you ever done anything difficult? I said, I did the Monte Carlo show. He said, you're hired. I mean, it was that fast. So I started doing that, and all of a sudden, here come some other shows. I'm starting to write some episodic. And it builds up and builds up, and I start getting a reputation for being pretty fast. Do you remember V, The Final Battle?
Yeah, I remember V, yeah.
Yeah, so I get a call, and they'd already had it scored. It was 6 days to air. An hour and 6 minutes of music still had to be done with 60 musicians. But Dick Harris called over there, and he said, hey, there's only one guy that can do that. That's Dennis, because he grew up in the sweat box or something. We don't know what happened. But he has no idea what a clock is for, or evenings, no sleep. So I come, and I do this. I do the show, and I'm writing, and it's going to the dub stage as I write, and we record, and it goes to the dub stage. And finally, there's this one sequence where it's the balloons dropping the poison to the aliens down. And I write the cue, and we record it, and I've got all the best players. I mean, just got George Deering on guitar, for God's sake. Ralph Humphrey on drums, percussion, Alan Estes. I mean, just the boys, Kenny Wilde, Chuck Berghofer. Just the greatest collection. Bob Finley on trumpet, just John, just unbelievable people. So I turn around and look at the booth after we've done the cue, and it's like this. And I say, oh, this is not good. So I go to the booth, and they said, Dennis, this is the climax of the show. This is the end. This is the Yo Mama moment of the 6-hour miniseries. And I said, oh, not Yo Papa. I said, no, Yo Mama, cut it out. So I said, all right. So I said, you know what? We're 15 minutes away from our lunch break. Let's take an hour 15. It'll take me that long. Okay. And I ran into the copyist room and said, give me score paper and a pencil sharpener, and just started to write. And then I went to Fred Selden, my woodwind player I'd known since high school. We had the EWI, the electronic woodwind instrument, with all the flourishes and stuff. And George Deering with his flourishes, and Ralph with his sin drums. Boom, 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 all those things. I said, okay, guys, I'm going to write you slash marks. I don't have time to write you notes, okay? Here's the chords, here's the slashes, here's when you hit. So I marked accents where I needed them to do something. And I said, okay, everybody got it? Let me hear the sound. Okay, great sound. All right. Okay, roll tape. Now here's the producer. So we do it, and I turn on the going, I mean, okay, yeah, I did rewrite the whole darn thing, but basically it was the guys putting their years of experience into what they played and knowing what was needed.
And Dennis, did you think that the original music that you did for that scene in V, did you think it was that bad? Like compared to say what you eventually ended up with?
Well, it was underscore.
Yeah.
And what I came up with was basically overscore, for lack of a better term. It's like take the scene and just nail it to the wall, where if they have dialogue, they're going to turn it off.
Right. Of course. Yes.
Usually the dialogue cuts the music out. In this case, the music cut the dialogue out. So,
and say with the transition.
What's that? Sorry.
I said the dialogue's not that important.
Yeah, who needs that?
So just in terms of then, say, you've moved into the realm of TV, Dennis, did you find that kind of transition hard in terms of when you're composing for, say, specific characters, for specific scenes and things like that, did you find that a bit of a unique transition? What did you find was the biggest kind of, say, thing that you had to adjust to in terms of taking on that new responsibility?
It was an adjustment, because I ended up, thanks to my friend Pete Myers, who's a wonderful composer, he got me into Dynasty. Well, Love Boat, Dynasty, eventually the Colbys, all those things. And he said, here's the trick. First of all, what you do is here's a list of Bill Conti's themes. Crystal Carrington had a theme. Everybody had a theme. The gardener had a theme. If he was cutting this way, he had this thing. Cutting this way, he had another theme. Every single thing was Bill. And they were great. But that you had to adhere to that. So if no matter if they come to the room and smack somebody in the face or they go, whatever it is, use their theme. Change the orchestration, but use their theme. So I did that, and it was great. But then, cut to the chase, I started doing a lot of shows. And Colby, same thing, Bill's themes, so forth and so on. Then I go do MacGyver. And Randy Edelman's theme, a great theme that he wrote for MacGyver.
Yeah.
And of course, the producer said, we want to hear that theme. And I said, boy, do you have it. I was raised to do this. I've lived to do this. So anyway, MacGyver, 6 years and 3/4, actually. I left when it kept going to Canada. I said, okay, they put me in a box for 2 hours. And Mr. Claustrophobia here wasn't too happy about that. So anyway, I go and do that. And then I get the call to do Star Trek. And Rick Berman and Peter Lortzen call me and Hurley, and they say, okay, we want you to take Jerry Goldsmith's theme for the movie and merge it with Alexander Courage's theme and make something out of it so it's an opening credit. So I did it on the synths, because I didn't really have the stuff. And I brought it in, they said, great, let's do it. So I did the first episode, and 18 years later, I did the last episode of Enterprise.
So
at this point, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, at this point, obviously, coming on board with Star Trek, such a well-known kind of franchise and thing like that. Had you watched the original series? Had you watched the movies?
Oh, sure. Oh yeah, and had great fun. Loved them. And anyway, I started. The point I was going to make is I get to start on Star Trek. Okay, I do it. They love the first one. I go to do the second Next Generation. Ron did the next one. I did the following one, and I repeated a thematic piece I'd written, the Picard theme. Yep. It became known as. And I'm out walking in Paramount lot, and the producer comes up and says, "I said, how's that score?" And he said, "Fine. Don't ever do that again." I said, "Don't do what?" He said, "We heard the same piece of music twice. You don't do that on this show. You do not repeat thematic material." They wouldn't let me use the Goldsmith theme as an act-on. Couldn't use anything.
Wow.
So basically, you had to sit at the piano and have musical Alzheimer's and just create a score that nobody's heard, you hope. Of course, the same thematic ideas, but no melodic, not at all. Never
so was
allowed.
that a little bit of a culture shock then compared to what you'd been doing previously?
Oh, quite a bit, because all the shows I'd been doing depended on you being thematic.
Yeah.
Using things that were associated with the show. And Star Trek, they didn't want any of that. And it's like I did one of them, Haven was one where, and I used a lot of violin. So, a lot of solo, fun, country sort of Baroque sort of stuff combination. And that was another one of those parking lots. Oh, how was my score? Great, don't ever do that again.
It sounds like a catchphrase you kept hearing, Dennis, over and over again. Was, "That's great, but we don't want to hear that again," kind of thing. And I think one of the things that categorizes the first 3 seasons of The Next Generation, by and large, is that you've got very different music kind of running throughout the episode to, say, a large degree. And like, did you find out the reason why they didn't want that repetition throughout? Like, was it just a stylistic choice that said, no, every episode has to feel like its own kind of world kind of thing?
Yeah, I think you nailed it. That's it. And it was just something they wanted. That's what they wanted to do. And I just went, okay, it's like working in the Chevy plant. Don't put that transmission on a Corvair. It's not going to work. So,
and as you went through season 1 and you were coming to the end, and obviously there was still a slight bit of uncertainty with it and things like that, like, did you feel that kind of the music that you were composing for the first season was kind of, fitting the bill, was doing the right kind of thing for the episodes? Were you happy with what you'd achieved so far?
For the most part, but they would crush the music at the session. Hey, what's that? What's a crescendo? No. And then the dub stage, I heard a French horn, down it go. So, but what happened is that eventually, as time went on, it got to the point where they started really liking a little more music, percussion. They would, have some percussion in there and have some crescendos and have some melodic things. And by the time we got towards the last couple, 3 years, we were writing stuff and, having a lot of fun. And Jay and I basically swapped shows. We each did an alternate show. And so I'd kind of turn on the TV, see what he'd done. He'd probably turn on the TV, see what the hell I'd done. But it was a lot of fun. A lot of fun.
Dennis, I'm going to ask you the unfortunate question here, which is, whose music was better, yours or Jay's?
Well, I think we're equal. And the reason being is that the producers would pick and choose which shows they wanted us to do. If something had a lot of jazz or groove to it, Jay. If they wanted something where, some planet blows up, it's Dennis. I was good at, planets and suns, supernovaing. I love things blowing up. Probably the Chevy plant. That's what happened to me.
So
no, Jay's stuff is great, and I really enjoyed what I did.
So what is your favorite episode that you worked on?
Boy, that is.
If you had to pick one that you've done, which is your favorite?
It's only like you only have to pick one of 258 episodes, Dennis. That's all. Like, it's very easy.
Well, there were a couple of ones. The pilot was the jellyfish.
Yeah.
Rising. I love that one. And I love the one where they had the holographic doctor's daughter die.
Yeah.
I mean, I could have never done that score in the first 3 years. Never have done it. It would have been thrown out. Because it was emotional.
Yeah.
And the other one was the final Deep Space Nine, that ending sequence. I just love that show. And
that ending sequence still makes me cry even to this day.
It's a great one. Yo, Mike.
And Dennis, this is the question now that I wanted to ask you, because this is what I've always wanted to ask you. So whenever somebody buys a new TV or a new phone or a new tablet or a new sound system, there's always one thing that they pick that they're going to say, this is what I want to watch to see how good the sound is. So for me, it has always been the opening of season 2 of The Next Generation, the child with the Enterprise coming towards the screen and all this kind of thing.
Chords and Marina Sirtis,
Yeah. And one of the things, if I remember correctly from an interview I saw with you, again, correct me if I'm wrong here, but if I'm right, you wanted to do a kind of a celebration team because we were back for season 2. We was worried that the show wouldn't have made it, but you weren't allowed to do it, so you had to do something different. So you gave them this, and to me, it is one of the most spectacular bits of music in all of Star Trek, because it's not a celebration, but it's just this wonderful burst of music that comes straight at you.
Oh, thanks. That was a moment, and the musicians loved it. You look out in the room, they're just smiling and, fixing my mistakes on the fly.
So actually one thing then, with that piece of music then that starts season 2 of The Next Generation, that kind of motif does kind of exist throughout the rest of season 2 quite a lot. But had they kind of started to relax the policy a bit more around that time, Like, because again, that was so prevalent throughout the season.
Yeah, I think they did, and also it was more of an orchestral piece. It was melodic, yes, but what was important to that piece for me was the orchestra underneath the melody, and what they did, what we did with the guys, and so I think it snuck by because it wasn't like bah, it wasn't any of that. It was like, okay, here it is. It was almost more of a motif than a thematic piece. I did sneak the Picard theme in now and then, but.
So in terms of then, so you've obviously done The Next Generation, you've done DS9, you've done Voyager, you've done Enterprise. In what way did you approach the series differently? Like, because before we did this interview, I was down doing the weekly shopping because I'm middle-aged and this is what I do of a Monday afternoon. And I was listening to the Emissary score as I was kind of doing my shopping. And I was just kind of conscious of the fact that all the 4 seasons series have such different kind of styles of music. So how did you approach each of them, say, trying to set the tone of this is the kind of music we're going to have, because it has to differentiate from each other. They have to sound differently. Yeah. How did you approach it?
Well, the Star Trek, The Next Generation, as we've spoken of, they wanted to really muted the music. They just didn't want the music to interfere with anything. I mean, towards the end, okay, it started to break out. Let's see. Deep Space Nine, I would say, was lonelier. It's this lonely outpost in space. So my theme was really lonely. It's just a solo trumpet and some backing from the strings and the French horns, of course. And so it kind of maintained that for a long time. And then, of course, we changed the theme, I think, in the 4th season, made it bigger and brought trombones in and stuff like that. And so then it got a little bigger, but still had a sense of longing to it, for lack of a better term. And a lot of the episodes were very sad. They had some sad episodes. Voyager J started. He did the arrangement for the theme, and it was more like his call on that show. So I basically listened to what he did, and I said, okay, let's stay consistent here. And so it was and the stories had a lot of like Chakotay, so you'd have a lot of Indian flutes and stuff like that. And so there was a chance to get into the world of the ethnic instruments, which was a lot of fun. Enterprise, I got a call from Peter Lortzen, who's like the main producer on the show, the hands-on guy.
Yeah.
And he said, Dennis, I said, what? He said, well, we're going to have to make a change in the music. Of course, the next sentence is, and here's your gold-plated watch, and thank you and go away. And then he says, but come on in, we'll talk about it. I went, whoa, I've heard that speech before and never ended up that way. So I go in and he says, we're now getting to where synthesizers are taking over a lot of scoring on a lot of shows, and people are expecting to hear some of this. And I said, well, I have synthesizers. I own a few. I don't know how to work them, but I've got a couple. And he said, okay, well, what let's do is let's get somebody who is a synth guy. And so we contacted Kevin Kiner. And so Kevin and I, what we would do is I would sit at home, write the stuff out, on a score, like I'd always do it. And I sent it to Kevin. And he would, quote unquote, realize it on his machines. And then Peter and, Don would come to his house up in where the heck was he? Anyway, up north. And Santa Clarita. And we would sit down and Kevin would play it and we'd make the changes we needed. Okay, that's too much or not enough, or make sure you clear this dialogue. And Kevin would make those changes, then we'd print out the music and show up with 3840 musicians and have them play on top of the synthesizer. So you had the synthesizer groove going, but you still had the orchestra in the fashion, the sense of Star Trek, which needs orchestras. It's what it is, And so it was a lot of fun.
So the orchestra then really was just kind of accenting the synths.
Yep. They were in addition to the synths. I mean, occasionally, no, actually everything was all there. And then I think about it. I mean, it wasn't like, okay, you do this.
Yeah.
But of course, we'd have somebody like George Deering on guitar, and he'd, of course, add his expertise in and give it a little bit of life. And Ralph would be playing some percussive thing, So we had a lot of fun.
So are there any episodes that you look at now that you would have liked to have scored?
That I didn't score?
That you didn't score, yeah.
The Borg. And I ended up not doing a lot of Borg for some reason. Well, Ron did. He did the first one, and I think he did the rest of them from then on. I may have had one or two. And then Jay was the Mr. Borg, so I did one or two, but, I love those characters.
And Jay, in terms of, say, when you were doing, or cheapers, Jay, good lord, because you said Jay Chataway stuck in my head. Dennis, in terms of, say, I know that in that retrospective they did on The Next Generation, there's a funny piece where it says Marina Sirtis coming down to you in the orchestra and doing the orchestrations. Would the actors come down to you much to kind of see what you were doing, or would it just be kind of not? What were they?
Yeah, Next Generation. Only that one. That was the only show where they would come down and visit. We'd go out to lunch or dinner. So it'd be Patrick and Michael Dorn and Marina and Gates and, LeVar, all the troops. We'd go to some place outside and in the sun and have a nice bite to eat and a drink. And it never happened again in the other shows.
That's because, like, when we spoke to Jay and we asked him which is the favorite series he worked on, he said The Next Generation. What was it about them that specifically kind of like why were they kind of so, say, liked by everybody? Say, I'm not necessarily saying at the expense of everyone else, but what elevated them to that kind of level, do you think?
Well, we were all family, all of us, not just the actors, but Jay, myself. And so it was like there was camaraderie, and I think it shows in the acting, and perhaps the writing too. I don't know. But we were really close. I did miss that one with the other three series, because I was kind of saying, hey, let's get, okay, never mind. No. Maybe a rap party.
Who was, out of all the Next Generation crew, who was kind of the most interested in the music?
Okay, that's a great question. Of the actors.
Yeah.
You mean? Yeah. Thinking. Probably Patrick.
I thought you might say that.
Yeah. I mean, they were all into it, but Patrick seemed to be the most interested. He would bring up, it sounds a little like Mahler or whatever, kind of stuff. So it was a lot of fun. And I miss that camaraderie, and I think the shows could have benefited by a little bit more of that. I mean, they were fine. I don't mean there was anything wrong, but, they really needed to get the folks together.
But when they were popping down to you, the Next Generation crew and things like that, Dennis, were they just watching, or would they have a kind of a conversation with you about the music and say the music that, say, would be specifically applied to their character or situation and things like that, and just trying to get a sense of when they pop down, what would be the interaction?
Yeah, basically, the sessions were so packed. I mean, you had to get so much music out in such a short time, or else you lost money. Yeah. So it would be like after the session, we'd talk. Oh, if you go 15 minutes over, you're $6,000 out with the musicians. So I would tape all the rehearsals. I would try not to do a rehearsal and then a take. I try to do the rehearsal is a take, and the musicians loved it because they're put them on their toes. It was fun for them. It's a challenge.
But also, I think that to itself just shows how good session musicians are.
Oh, amazing!
As a whole, session musicians they're just a different breed, aren't they?
Yeah.
Where they can just turn up, they've never seen it, never heard it, and just play it flawless.
Yeah, they were great guys. I mean, the woodwind section, Fred Selden on his EWI, Gene Cipriano played oboe, English horn, E-flat contrabass, clarinet, and Susan Greenberg, our great. We finally brought in a legit flute player. The guy said, "Dennis, we're not a legit flute. Come on, bring in a player.
We need a flautist."
She was fat, and then Pete Chrisley. I don't know if you ever remember the old Tonight Show. Doc Severinsen, he was the lead tenor sax soloist on that show. So he was in the pit. And oh man, some of the stuff. And anytime you hear jazz saxophone, it's Pete. Anytime you hear jazz trumpet, it's Bob Finley. John Lewis played all the legit stuff, and Bob Finley did the groove things. So we had a fun group.
And in terms of, say, as we look at the Emmy nominations and things like that, which are 2 wins, I'd have to correct IMDb for that, of course. Do you think you should have won more?
No. I was happy. Somebody told me the other day that Star Trek period got 16 Emmy nominations.
Yeah.
And I was nominated for 9 of those 16. So I'm happy.
Actually, one question, Dennis, that I always thought about this is that if I remember correctly, when the last episode of Cheers aired, if I'm right, the end credits were kind of changed, so it wasn't the normal kind of music that kind of played out. I think it was kind of just like a solo piano or something like that.
Yeah.
And whenever I watch All Good Things, say the last episode of Star Trek Next Generation, and the Enterprise flies off into the sunset and all that kind of thing, and then you have that momentary second where like the music of the episode ends, we get into the end credits and all that. Did you ever say to yourself, I want to actually do something different for the end credits? Because like for me, I always kind of feel that the end credits are kind of, this week's adventure is over, we'll be back next week and all that. But this was the end of something remarkably special. And I always wanted to know, did you ever say to yourself, no, we're going to change the end credits because it's the last episode? No, you never did.
No, but there was no option. I mean, they would not have let me do that. So what I did is the end of Deep Space Nine, I did that cue with the solo trumpet, which I thought would have been great to have the end credits be just the solo trumpet, period.
Yeah.
Right.
Wouldn't that have been great? And maybe and a French horn, the two guys.
And how did Generations come up then? Because obviously you've been working on the Next Generation, the TV series, you've been working on DS9 now at this point. Voyager is on its way as well, which obviously Jay is going to be taking a bit of a lead on. Did you think that you'd get the nod to do the movie?
No. And what happened is that they contacted, I believe, and I hope my story is correct, they contacted Jerry Goldsmith, but he was either too busy or, whatever the reason was, he didn't take the job. So the producers, Rick Berman and Peter, are in talking to the head of music, and they said, what should we do? And he said, well, you got Dennis sitting right there. What's your problem? It was basically like that. And so basically, I went over to Rick's house, and I'd written a theme, and I played it for him, and his son was sitting there, and his son said, can you change that one note? I said, sure. Change the note, and that was it. And the movie was such great fun. I mean, I had 80, 90 musicians. Yeah. The Los Angeles Master Chorale, 24 singers, triple tracked, which cost, I don't know, more than my car, and more than all the cars I've owned. But and then one of the interesting things about Generations, the Nexus scene where Patrick is in with his family. Steve had put in, our great music editor, put in Mahler's Adagiato from the Fifth Symphony. It's a beautiful piece. I mean, just haunting. And I said, okay, now I'm in trouble. I can't match that. You don't match Mahler. I mean, he's magnificent. And I said, so what I'll do is I'll basically, instead of doing this piece where it goes major to minor with a lot of pianos, you got to listen to it. Stunning. I said, I'm going to do a tone poem. So that's what I did for that whole scene. It was just huge, slow-moving clusters of tones with choirs and things like that. And so I got 180 degrees away because I knew if I tried to do what Mahler had done, it'd show up on the dub stage and they go, well, that sucks, And this way it was like something they hadn't expected. And they liked it, so, it worked out. Of course, a lot of Star Trek fans hated it. Can't win them all.
No. How long did it take you to score Generations? Was it a long process? Because obviously, with the shows, you're done in a few days. But
yeah, I'd say I took a week, something like that. Maybe 9 days.
Oh, okay. So it was pretty quick.
Yeah, but it's kind of the way I work. If I think about it too much, it kind of nosedives. I like first thoughts, so that's what I do.
And what was the biggest transition you found then, Dennis, going from the TV series into, say, getting, doing the motion picture?
The transition, for me, it was the same thing, except I had a heck of a lot more talent sitting out there. I mean, huge orchestra, singers, time, and I'd still tape the rehearsals because that's always my favorite thing. But occasionally I'd, get out. And of course I could overdub, which you could never do on TV because it doubles the cost, basically. And they said, overdub the strings, overdub the singers. Okay, great. So we ended up with this huge sounding score. Of course, it was buried in the mix, but what else is new? Although David Carson, the director, he and I and his wife and Pat, his wife Kim, who was actually played Picard's wife in the dream sequence. The four of us went out, Patty, myself, Kim, and David, to watch the show when it came out in the theaters, and he was not too happy. He said, "They've buried your music." And he said, "However, I'm in charge of the DVDs and the streaming." Or streaming hadn't happened yet. He said, "I'm in charge of the DVD mix." And so he pushed the music up. So if you see, and I think even the film now, when it streams, it has the new mix in it. So.
And so when you look back at it, because I think Jeepers, I think it was 29 years ago yesterday it came out in the theaters. Like, do you look back at it now and say, I could have done this better, I could have done that better? Or do you say, do you know what, I really actually think that was a really good, part of, a body of my work?
I'd say it's about a 60-40 split. 60% says, God, that's awful. And 40% says, okay, I hit the nail on that one. It's like when I used to do arrangements for Glenn Campbell, and they'd show up on records, of course. Remember those round things that used to spin anyway? So Glenn would, and Patty and I would be driving in the car, and we're listening to He Ain't Heavy or one of those giant pieces. He had a high D above Pavarotti, and he had a low C, Russian bass. The guy, when they say, oh, he has a 4-octave range, no, he really did. Not falsetto, I'm talking yo. And so Patty and I will be driving along, and we're about to stop in at Mercado and get ourselves a nice couple of enchiladas, and here comes Glenn, and I'm going, oh God, I can't stand to listen to it. I would do it so different. He did a version of My Way we were listening to yesterday driving, and I said, I can't believe how awful that was. I duplicated the vocal in the string line.
Hindsight is a wonderful thing. So, just sticking with the Generations theme, did you take any influences from anyone else throughout that score? Did you pull any Goldsmith in? Did you pull anyone else in? Or
boy, not really. It's just I guess all the years of doing the episodes, I kind of had my little case of ideas.
So you were your influence. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, and of course Sandy Courage's great theme. I was so happy to use that, and I had to fight to get it in the movie. They said, "Oh, come on. You have to have Sandy's theme in here."
Yeah.
So it shows up a couple of times, the bottle crashing onto the hull of the ship. And there's one other spot where it shows up. And he and I, we went to, little sidebar. We went to the Hollywood Bowl. They were doing a Star Trek night. And so the conductor said, well, you guys can come and stand on the side, behind the curtains, but you can't come out. And I said, okay. So here's my city. This is Hollywood. Come on. Well, my city's Burbank. So I said, okay. So I'm standing there with Sandy, Alexander, as he's officially known. And they got through with one of his pieces. And I said, are we going to stand for this shit? And he said, nope. Went right out. Shook hands with the conductor. He's going, oh, God, okay. Taking away from my magnificence.
So, Dennis, do you have a favorite track and I'd say least favorite track from Generations?
Boy, that's a great question.
See, Dennis, I told you, you're coming here for all the tough questions. Like we're not easy interviews.
Thinking. I love the opening. The opening, the bottle crash. I love that. I love the Nexus scene and Captain Kirk on the horse. Very energetic piece. And I wish it had gone about 2 minutes longer. I would have loved to have had some more fun with that one. And as far as negative, not really. We fixed everything in the session. That sucks. Okay, let's do something else. So.
I actually remember, Jeepers, I'd say about 10 years ago, when I finally realized there was such a thing as the score of a film, where you'd get all the music, because I was always conscious of the fact that there was bits of music from the movie that weren't on the official soundtrack. And there was only so much putting my tape player up against the TV and recording it and kind of listening to it and kind of that way. But I contacted, I know it's GMP Crescendo or whatever it was, and I said, listen, this is before the re-release happened all of those years ago. And I said, is there any way to get the entire score of the movie, because there's bits of music that I left out? I don't think they had any clue what the hell I was on about, because they're going, look, there's bits of music that are left out. I was having to explain like certain scenes where the music wasn't on the score, and they never got back to me, strangely enough. Over the years, Dennis, like with the expanded soundtrack and things like that, what do you think the reception is now to kind of soundtrack, say, currently versus what it was, say, when it first came out?
I think when 30 years hit, which is coming up soon, I'll be 80 next year, so it's a good time to do it. I bet you there'll be some interest, because, the new series are bringing a lot of people into the fold. And they use some of my music in it. Very happy.
And did you...
Go ahead, sorry.
Did you hope after Generations that you might have been called back for First Contact or Insurrection or Nemesis even?
No, I knew it'd be Jerry. I think he really realized he'd made a goof by not doing Generations. I don't know why he didn't do it. I'm glad he didn't, for my sake, but he did everyone after that. It's like, okay, I've learned. And Jerry remains of all the film composers out there, he is my favorite. I love his uniqueness, what he does. And okay, John Williams and a theme, all right,
John Williams does a theme for sure.
Exactly. Thomas Newman and his beautiful use of eclectic instruments. George Deering on guitars, everything, mandolin. Thomas is great. Anyway, so that's, God, keep going back after all those years. Wonderful. I'm sorry, what was I saying? I got lost with, my favorite composer, Jerry Goldsmith, yeah. No, but there was one prior, a question prior.
Oh,
that's why I should have Patty's my mobile brain.
Dennis, in terms of, say, like when you started in 1987, did you think 18 years later that you'd still be scoring Star Trek episodes at that point?
No, I didn't. I really had no idea. And right now I'm doing music. I throw music at Ancient Aliens now and then and things like that. As a matter of fact, it's my theme, which is pretty cool. And so I work 3 hours a day. I do little albums. I did an album of my own, just me and the piano. It's called, Tunes from Future Past. I think that's the title, yeah. And it's just me and the piano. And they always have one available, or maybe two, on Amazon. But it's all my favorite songs, and it's played like an arranger would play. I'm not like I've mentioned the other pianists. And as a matter of fact, I sent it before I agreed to have it released to Tom Renier and Jim Cox, the pianistic greats. And I said, is this going to embarrass me? Because it's simple piano. It's just me and the piano. Nothing fancy, no flourishes.
I'm just looking at the title list for it now. I think my favorite track name is DS9 at 3 a.m.
Oh, yes. That is used in Star Trek fans' weddings, that particular track. They go down the aisle to it. They go down the aisle to that piece.
I'm making a note of that. I'm sure my other half will be thrilled to walk down the aisle to DS9.
So anyhow, I asked Jim and Tom, and they said, Dennis, it's you. Nobody's expecting anything more. They didn't say it like that, but so it's fun I give it out as Christmas gifts now. First Christmas I'll have it, but
And say with especially in the last, say, 10, 12 years, there's been such a massive kind of interest in like a lot of the music being released on CD and streaming and things like that. Have you been kind of surprised by that level of interest in the music from different series?
Oh, yeah. It's like I went on Spotify, and unless I misread it, it said, I think in the last month, something of mine, everything included, has been downloaded 39,000 times in a month.
Yeah.
I think it pays 5 cents total, but it's
It's
good to get out.
0.00001 cent per stream.
Exactly.
You have to do 1,000 streams to get a cent, which is ridiculous.
Yeah, I know.
But see, for someone like me, Dennis, whenever I go on a road trip or something like that, I would predominantly listen to the music of, say, The Next Generation or DS9, whatever. Like Yesterday's Enterprise is a particular kind of favorite of mine, because I kind of find that, and Mike would be probably the same as me, is that if I'm sitting down reading something, I can't do it listening to music that has lyrics. So actually on Saturday morning, just gone, I was sitting down reading a book, and I turned on Deep Space Nine in the background, but I said, no, I can't pay attention to this. So instead, I turned on your music, and I was sitting there for 4 hours just listening to your music in the background.
Oh.
And it's the perfect way for me to be able to just focus on what I'm doing, but listen to something nice in the background. So I was listening to all your Deep Space Nine music as I was reading my book. So I think that's what a lot of people kind of, connect with the music kind of in that way.
Well, you'll probably like the piano album. It's music you can ignore.
In the best possible way.
But I think that goes to just show, well, for that's just down to film scores in general, I think. Because I do the same. If I'm working on something or I'm reading something, I'll put a film score on of some description.
Yeah.
I mean, I was very fortunate last week to go to a sci-fi orchestral night. Where they had 3 Star Trek sections, one of which was from TNG. So, but the other one was from Picard, and Stephen Barton, one of the composers of Picard, season 3. He was there, and he's done a special arrangement for it.
Never met him.
He's lovely. Stephen Barton is absolutely lovely. But I've never heard Star Trek played by a live orchestra before.
It
was just phenomenal.
Yeah, we did that at the Pantages Theater in Hollywood, and I got to conduct this giant medley that I put together with 70 guys and gals. I shouldn't be, sexist. So anyway.
I think the only time I've heard like Star Trek music performed live, I think, was not long after James Horner tragically passed away in Dublin. They had a night of James Horner music, and they ended it with the opening and ending of Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, and it was the first time I'd ever heard. I'd never heard Star Trek music live like that before.
Yeah, we miss him. What a talent! Well,
some of my favorite scores are his.
Yeah, absolutely. And he had so much more in him.
Yeah.
And Dennis, in terms of, say, the current Star Trek series and things like that, what do you think of the music in those series compared to, say, what you would have been doing, say, between 87 and 05?
I'm actually surprised at how similar it is. Of course, there's elements in there that we didn't even have access to, the synthesizers and so forth. But I think it stays, Jeff Russo does a lot of them. It's very melodic, and I think it fits the show very well. I think the show has really held up musically for all these years, because everybody who does the music for the show has to understand that this is important.
Yeah.
This is something that is going to live forever. Sorry to quote who, but it's important that you make it, as beautiful as you can and as emotional as you can. So it's a lot of fun.
And Mike asked you a while back, what was the favorite episode you worked on? But I'm going to actually be even more specific than that, Dennis. What is your favorite piece of music from all the Star Treks you did? And that's all 258, like one piece. Obviously, when we spoke to Jay, it was the theme from The Inner Light that he obviously very much gravitated towards.
Great piece. I think I mentioned these before, but I think The Doctor's Daughter Dying, and I don't remember the name of that episode.
Real Life, is it, or something like that? I don't know.
Real Life. Very good. That scene where the daughter dies. I mean, I played it for my class, and they're all crying.
Yeah.
And once again, the opening of Generations, and the Nexus. Actually, everything from Generations I loved. I really loved everything because it was so big. Without being overpowering. It had size without hurting you.
Yeah.
And
The funny thing is, as you're saying that about Generations, the two bits of music that I always wanted to try and get, that's one of the reasons I emailed GMP Crescendo all those years ago, was the scene when Kirk meets Demora Sulu on the bridge of Enterprise B, and the music when Picard gets the news back from Earth, because they're very poignant in terms of, say, like Kirk meeting Demora Sulu is kind of very much a kind of situation of age and experience, like of, you know, the experience of Kirk versus the youth of Demora Sulu, and then obviously Picard getting the news. And I thought they were so kind of personal, and they're very beautiful two bits of music.
Yeah. Well, it's like, you know, as a composer, so much of what you write is based on what your life experiences have been. And, you know, 9 years with Glenn, going out with the Hot Hells to Vietnam to play USO tours and stuff like that. A lot of experiences, and a lot of them great, a lot of them sad. And you inject that hopefully into your music in a way that it comes out and it's understood for what it is.
And Dennis, what do you think your legacy is to Star Trek music?
Boy, French horns.
I love a French horn.
I did too. They couldn't believe it when I did the first Next Generation. They said, "What do you need?" I need 6 French horns. Well, we'll give you 2. I said 6. They said 4. I said 6 are goodbye. And 4 trumpets, 4 trombones, you know, 4 woodwinds and the strings. I needed that. One of the reasons is that I write very tough parts for the horns. I'm not on purpose. It's just that I like them high. Yeah. And I like them low. And I love the mid-range too, but I like to kind of stretch them a little bit. So I always give one horn player a rest. So 5 are playing at a time. One guy's taking a break, you know, so they don't hurt themselves.
Is the French horn then one of your favorite instruments?
Yes. I'll tell you a quick story. I had when I was on the Glenn Campbell Good Time show, Milt Bernhardt was one of the trombone players. He did the da 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 da, you know, on Sinatra's "Gotcha Under My Skin." So he's in the orchestra, and Paige has me write a chart. I write a chart and throw it on the stands. And Milt at the end says, "Dennis, come over here." He had this huge voice, and I said, "Okay." He said, "I want to show you something," and he pointed to my part for him. He said, "What do you see?" I said, "Well, it's your part." He said, "No, it's 32 bars of expletive deleted whole notes." I said, "You think we're a goddamn Hammond B3? I said, "We have to breathe now and then." And he said, "I want you to go out and buy an instrument, a brass instrument, come back in a month and play me 32 bars of whole notes." So I went out and bought a French horn. I think I made it through 21 bars, practically passed out. And it was a great lesson, you know. Don't beat up the brass players. But anyway, French horn, that was my answer.
Mike, I have one last question for Dennis. Do you have any other questions yourself?
Nope.
So Dennis, this is the last question that we ask, and something we always ask of all our guests. Dennis McCarthy, what does Star Trek mean to you?
It's the biggest part of my musical life, period. I mean, Glenn Campbell was huge, but Star Trek eclipses everything else. I mean, you can imagine 18 years of joy, of just sitting at this piano with a pencil, yep, and just having a great time, you know. And I'm still working, but, you know, it's nothing will ever touch those days. So that's it, you know.
Fantastic stuff. Dennis, thank you so much for your time with us today. Your story has been absolutely incredible. Thank you for everything you've done in terms of 258 episodes and 1 movie as well. Dennis, thank you so much. Mike, thanks as much as well for your company. So guys, thank you very much for watching or listening in, and we'll be back with another episode next week. Thank you very much.